So I wanted to ask you, is boredom then a state of inactivity slash no activity and only needs to be a time for reflection on your life? Or is boredom a means to an end? Because it almost feels like uh, any I'm not confused, but I'm just intrigued to know, like, because
Yeah.
it feels like, okay, if you are distracted, then that's kind of boredom avoidance, right? Because then you're going from one thing to another thing because you don't
Yeah.
want that gap of silence or gap of lack of activity. But
Mhm.
um, so, what exactly is boredom then?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's something which I'd like to
Yeah.
understand.
That's great. You're asking me to define. What am I talking about here? Boredom simply is a state of disinterest.
Hmm.
So and there's, it gets parsed in different ways, but two of the fundamental ways, and this is Heidegger talking about this difference between situational boredom and existential boredom. So
Right.
situational boredom is I'm in a situation, I'm in a class, and I'm bored by the teacher. And
Hmm.
it's a boring class, or I'm reading a boring book. And it's a situation that has kind of a limits to it. Once this class ends, I will be out of this bored state. But it's important to note that it's not an objective state. We tend to think about it objectively. We tend to say that's a boring person or a boring book, as if
Hmm.
boredom is somehow in the object.
Right.
But in fact, it's our subjective assessment of a situation.
Hmm.
And we know that, I don't find the game of chess to be particularly interesting.
Right.
I think it's kind of boring.
Right.
Um, but I think that's a character flaw in me, because I have friends who love chess and say, no, 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 if you attend to it, you will see the magic and wonder and
But
strategy.
sorry, is that a flaw or is that just what makes you you and makes you identify with, say, uh, someone like me who will say, "Oh man, I don't like chess either. Let's go play tennis." You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Why is it
yeah,
perceived as a flaw?
yeah. Are you a tennis player, by the way?
No, I used to love tennis, but then when I was 8, I lost
Okay.
my central vision to genetic disorder. But I love the game. I love,
Okay.
but now I can't watch it because it's just like men grunting and I can't even see the balls. I'm like, yeah, I'll just watch
Yeah.
golf.
Because I too love tennis. So
Right,
you distracted me in a good way when you brought up tennis
right,
as
right.
chess. I think that part of the issue though is when we're bored situationally, we can make a snap judgment about an activity, a person, a
Hmm.
book, and and miss something that might actually be genuinely interesting to us if we stay
Yeah,
with it for a while. I mean, anything good requires pushing through the lulls. Certainly to get good at a language or an instrument or a sport, you have to drill, and drills are repetitive and tedious. So I think to your point, I think, yeah, there can be. I'm more interested or drawn to tennis than chess, but my bored mind doesn't give chess a chance. It writes it off too quickly, and that's the situational boredom. The existential boredom that Heidegger talks about is is more profound. It's really you're bored with life. You can't really find anything that really sustains your interest. And
right.
kind of a simple example that I use. I don't know if you've ever, you know, you have Netflix there, I presume.
Of course, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. When you open up Netflix and you see 1,000 different movie titles and just nothing interests you. Like I'm just
Hmm.
not drawn to anything, which is kind of amazing. There's almost an infinite amount of options there, and yet, you just feel like I'm just not really. And so that's kind of a whiff of existential boredom. So boredom is this state of disinterest, and it's characterized by restlessness, and it can also be characterized by a lack of agency, where you're stuck. I cannot figure out what to do to get out of this state. And so when you think about students in a bored class, what concerns me is I mentioned there's avoidance, but on the other hand, there's a resignation to the bored state. And I've visited a lot of classrooms as a teacher, and you'll see students in classrooms that I think are incredibly boring, and they're just completely docile and passive. And you would hope that they would be misbehaving, or that they would be doing something on the sly, and oftentimes they're just completely kind of almost vacant, and they've just kind of been. And I think there are workplaces that do this to us, that are very boring, and you just learn how to be in this very resigned kind of state.
Not really be kind of, don't put your head above water because you might get called out. So just kind of just ride the wave, kind of,
Right.
yeah, being kind of, yeah, that's, yeah. And sorry if I interrupted your
Mhm.
thought, because
You're
it
fine.
kind of leads me into this space, which is, you know, um, wh- is it is it good to be bored, and maybe how much uh, is it how much boredom in a day is it healthy for a person to experience?
I think it's good to protect our attention. And we tend to set ourselves up. We have a restaurant here called Buffalo Wild Wings.
Mm.
When you walk to Buffalo Wild Wings, there's 40 television screens, and each screen has something different on it.
Ooh,
And
okay, okay,
and you're there with your friends, but behind your friends, and literally all around you, 360 are screens, each flashing some usually sporting events.
right.
And I think that's kind of how we live our lives now, where
Mm.
we're trying to have a conversation, and there's screens all around us, and our attention is we're just setting ourselves up to have short attention, to be distracted from distraction by distraction. And so I think what we what I when I'm at my best, I'm actually removing all those screens, and I'm trying to just attend to one thing. And so putting my phone off to the side, literally going for a walk where all I have is a book, or I'm trying to play, I play amateur poor guitar, but just doing that for
Mm.
20 minutes, just doing that in a way that prevents me from being interrupted. I think that's the kind of so boredom will come during those spaces of time. It might come, um, but the bored mind just wants to quickly jump from whatever it is you're doing to something else. And so I do think it's a state that comes up, that we need to learn to recognize and push past to get to better things, because you don't really enjoy something unless you actually stick with it for a while. Um, learning, as I said, learning something new, initially it can be boring, but it's not until you get some proficiency at it that you realize, oh, this is actually way more enjoyable. You mentioned the game of tennis.
Mm.
Starting out, tennis is just miserable. I mean, it's sort of fun, but you're kind of, but it's not until you've done those drills that you get to this higher level and can appreciate just how incredible the game is.
Yeah, it's true because it almost sounds like, you know, everyone, like even today, it's like you have to pack your day with, a list, a to-do list, goals, 5 year
Yeah,
goals, or
yeah.
improving on yourself. But can boredom, because I've heard a few people talk about anxiety as a system built into you to tell you that there's something about the way you're thinking or the way you're living your life that is not working for you, and maybe you should look within, or just take stock of what's going on, and maybe change a few things, or maybe address a few things, maybe past
Yeah.
patterns or past thoughts. So can boredom be a gauge of how we're engaging with the world around us? Could be the way we are looking at the world, our perspective, but maybe also the way we are putting across our intention, the way we are kind of coming across with the work we do, or the things we say.
Mhm.
And as a result, kind of be a check and balance for that.
I think it can, but I think here's the distinction. I mean, boredom is a mood state, and you think of other mood states. You mentioned anxiety. I'm thinking of anger and fear. So we get angry, or we experience fear, and and oftentimes there's a clear object of I'm angry at this person who cut me off in traffic,
Yeah.
and then we have to figure out how to regulate our response to the anger state. If we overreact, I was watching this show on Netflix, called The Beef, and it begins with a road rage incident, and it just goes from there, and this rage just continues from episode to episode,
Mm.
and I bring it up just because it's an example of how this the mood state of anger. It's so clear that we need to get a handle on it. The difference between the mood state of anger and fear or anxiety and boredom tends to fly under the radar.
Mm.
We tend to be navigating away from boredom without even realizing we're doing it. So to your point, could boredom actually be an indicator that, maybe this isn't the right job? Maybe this relationship I'm in is just not, it's not a good fit for me.
Mm.
And instead of taking time to think about that, we tend to have a knee-jerk response, which is avoidance or resignation.
Right.
And so, taking time to, all right, what is going on here? Am I really bored by the game of chess, or do I need to attend a bit more and stay with it? And then over time, I might realize that, I think it's a fine enough game, but I'm not going to cultivate the game of chess. I'm going to work on something else. Um, so I think it can be an indicator of that, or, we get bored and we just go down a lot of other different pathways, and I mentioned, just the negative behaviors that are causally correlated with boredom can take up a lot of bandwidth in our living.
It's almost like boredom is an opportunity for you as an individual to ask the right questions as opposed to just looking for the answers.
I think that's right. I mean, I think, going back to this older conception of boredom, and I mentioned the notion of acedia, is it's not a trustworthy mood state. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
And we tend to just trust it. I'm bored by this person or by this book. And, there were books that I found boring that I now realize, no, that's actually an incredible book. And my bored state, I shouldn't trust it.
Right. So just to, yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? Because if I just sometimes, early on, someone would say, let's go watch this play. And I'm like, are you crazy, a play? But I actually went. So the point I'm trying to kind of get to is that if you can get past that first knee-jerk reaction of, it's dismissal, right? I think then it leads you to maybe pondering, maybe chess ain't that bad. Why are so many people doing? So it could be if you push past it. And it looks like the things that help you push past the initial knee-jerk negative avoidance or submission to boredom, a couple of things is discipline and purpose, right? If you are disciplined, you're able to kind of get through that first, the fugue, if you want to call it, or that first way to say, oh, I'm going to, there's boredom, I'm going to turn right. It's like a dead end, which I'm going to turn right and run straight for the phone, or run straight towards negative thinking, or whatever it could be, the coping mechanism for boredom. But how important is it? Because, if a kid now at the age of 9 goes on Instagram or goes on TikTok, it seems like no one is bored. It seems like the life these people are living is just perfect, right? It's like a reel to reel to reel.
Yeah.
So how do they develop this idea, to appreciate that there is going to be phases, going to be times in the day when you're bored, when no one's there to engage with you, but you don't have to get on social media to kind of be told that everyone else except you is not bored. What are some of the things that at a young age, because it's not something that ends today, ends tomorrow. It's not like puberty. It's not like menopause. At 45, you're no longer going to be bored. So how does someone develop these I wouldn't say a value system, but this appreciation of what boredom is? And because we tell kids, don't get unnecessarily angry, control your anger, or understand where anger is coming from, where your fear is coming from, but we never tell anyone how to look at boredom.
Yeah, I mean, I think parents can feel a lot of anxiety about their kids being bored and take the burden. It's the parents' job to keep their kids from getting bored, which is really real problematic, because it's a mood state that each of us has to figure out and contend with ourselves. I think we need to talk about boredom. We need to actually educate children about the bored state. We tend not to talk about it at all. When my son was in kindergarten, first day he walks into class, and on each of the tables, this was about 10 years ago now, there were iPads, 4 iPads, and the teacher on day one was already communicating that we're going to have this screen here to engage with, to do the learning, which I think is oftentimes just a teacher trying to outwit or outrun boredom through technology. I'm thinking about, I used to take my kids to the beach, and when they were 3 and 5, all they needed was a shovel and a bucket.
Yeah.
They would just be wrapped for 2 hours. So I think that naturally children actually have a propensity for sustained attention in very simple, wonderful things. And culturally, we condition that out of them.
Yeah.
When we draw them into this kind of artificial construct world, that kind of gives them dribs and drabs of attention and dopamine and all this stuff. So I think that we actually instinctually crave and desire, sustained, meaningful attention. So whenever I see a child, just doing art and being mesmerized, engrossed in that for 20 minutes, that's gold. I mean, that's a human being, and their mind is completely wrapped with something. And it's not just a passive kind of attention; it's an active kind of attention. And I think what happens with boredom avoidance is it draws us into this sort of passive consumption to just kind of veg out. I just want to veg out. I just want to relax, have a drink, and veg out. Versus leisure, going back to this early vision of education, cultivating leisure, it's not work where you have to be on, you're kind of, focused. Leisure is doing something that requires an attention, but it also involves being kind of receptive at the same time. And there's a kind of a renewing process to it. So I think we need to educate this in schools. We need to talk about it. We need to be explicit about it. When I teach students in my classes, I'll tell them, look, there's going to be stretches that you might feel boredom, but trust me, if you push through this, you're going to get to this higher level. And I do think when teachers build trust with students, they can actually leverage that trust to say you got to push through the boredom state. Don't trust the boredom state. Trust this guide who's helping you. I have a friend who used to invite me to go on walks. I don't like walking. I find it kind of boring. And having done it multiple times, and realizing just sort of the benefits of this, it's like, wow, we actually have a really good conversation. I feel, it's just good to get out of my office. I've come to realize, there's something here in this very simple practice that is leisurely and not boring at all. So